Well, hello. I'm Karen Marshall, and I'm here today to talk to you about one of my life passions, and that is the story of the Bassett family of Browns Park, Utah. And I'm wearing this hat because my dad gave it to me, but I have cherished it because um, it just my dad's in this with me. He's not here on this planet right now, but he's been with me in the story of the Bassett family since very early on and has supported me in so many ways in getting prepared and in writing script. So I am a storyteller and I'm a writer, and the story that I'm going to tell you about today, I'm going to share a log line and just let you know the log line and the synopsis, and I'm going to go from there for anyone who has any further interest. Who knew that somewhere in Utah, on the border of Utah, Wyoming, and Colorado in 1874, two sisters, along with their mother, would rustle cattle, fight cattle barons, be tried twice for cattle rustling, be acquitted both times, and be guilty as sin. David Lawnfield wrote that the past is a foreign country. You're invited to see what the past looked like in Browns Park as Elizabeth, Josie, Anne, and their mother learned to outsmart the law and live their most unconventional lives. The conflicts between the Bassett family and the outlaws who crossed their land, avoiding the law as they circled borders of 3 states, will capture you. The characters are as individual and unique as the makeup of DNA that all of us have been born with. They came seeking new land, as most pioneers did. They found it. They built on it. And then they had to protect it at unusual cost. Did they compromise their beliefs and values that they'd been taught? Some did. Did they experience great loss and unexpected obstacles? You bet. Did they outwit their enemies? Yes, often. Did they start young? Yes, they did. Did they define the small community called a park? They did. They fought with unheard of tools, and they would do anything to protect their cattle, their land, and each other. As a family in a homestead set apart from their neighbors, did they build relationships that would last a lifetime and sometimes end right there? You guess. The daughters of Herb and Elizabeth Bassett, along with their brothers, are legends. They have been hiding in books and local tales for as long as time. And now is the time to share their story, outside the confines of the community legends, bits and scraps and records. They have been hidden from a larger audience, but now is their time to shine as viewers witness the audacity, strength, tragedy, and goodness of the incredible lives that they lived. So I'd like to show you a picture, and you won't be able to see it very well, but of my dad. And this is at the Bassett Cemetery in the park. The Bassetts had a homestead, and they built their own cemetery, and the whole family is buried there. And so we decided, when I first became interested in the story of the girls and the mother and the father and the brothers, we decided to go up there and see their graves. And this is a picture of the day that we did that. This is what my dad wrote here. He said, "You sold me. Keep it up. Where is Brown's Park? I need it right now. I'll strip logs and chase chickens. That's the only life for a real man. I have no trouble at all picturing the film. I'm amazed at the myriad and subtle conflicts that make this human and alluring. Love, Dad." At the bottom, he says in big letters, "More, please." I have an uncle who has written a novel, and my uncle wrote to me, and he said, "Listen, keep up your ambition to write that script. I can tell from what you showed me that you have what it takes. It is a gift promised or possessed by only a few. Never give up your dream." Well, I was in my late 30s when I met the Bassett family in Vernal, Utah. My husband's mother was a friend of one of the daughters, granddaughters. So I'm going to tell you a little bit now about the characters in the play. The characters are Herb Bassett, who is a solid guy, but he's kind of fragile, and he's kind of weak, and he's sickly, but he's stoic. He's religious. He's intelligent. He fought in the Civil War. Oh, I'd like to be able to tell all about his experiences in the Civil War, but in order to do that, I'd have to write a limited series, and I don't know if that's really where I want to go with this. Elizabeth, Mary Eliza. She'd like to be called Eliza. Elizabeth Bassett was genteel, Southern, young when they married. Herb was 39 and Elizabeth was 15. Now that's quite a difference in age. Nothing that doesn't happen today, but anyway, she was a risk taker. And she had all of the um, the fortitude to face the unknown, and whatever was before her, she was willing to do whatever it took. And when she needed to be soft, she was soft. And when she needed to be tough, she was tough. I mean, she did things that most men wouldn't even dream of. They were outrageous. She had a way with men, the cowboys. You see, after a while, she and Herb couldn't do the ranch or the homestead by themselves, so she built a bunkhouse and hired a bunch of men who followed her with undying obedience. They would die for her. There was something about her. She was a risk taker. And she took care of business. They had, their first daughter was Josie. Now Josie was strong, but she had a more domestic side to her. She grew up being practical. She grew up following her mother's instructions and learning the ways of womanhood and the things that women typically did, as well as the other things they didn't typically do. She had the reputation for marrying 7 times. In other words, if a guy didn't really please her, she found a way to run him off, or some have suggested she may have even done away with one of them. But that's just legend and rumor, right? Then there's a character by the name of Hy Bernard. Hy Bernard was a bachelor. He came to the park. Actually, not really to the park. He was in Colorado as the foreman for Ora Haley, the largest cattle baron in Wyoming at the time. And he had a reputation above all else. In the script, in the story, you'll find how Anne manages to steal Hy away from Ora Haley. The next character I'd like to talk about is Isom Dark. Isom Dark was a black man who came from Texas with gathering his cattle as he made the journey to Browns Park. He arrived there with 15, 20 head of cattle and met the Bassetts and decided to join in with them and work for them. And he did that for many years. He was a character. One of his ears was cut off, and the Bassett children loved to ask him about how he lost his ear and what happened. But I've never heard the story. I don't know if he told it to them. Then there was Jim McKnight. Jim eventually got Josie pregnant, and they had 2 children, Crawford and Click. And Jim was, he's just one of the hands. The bunkhouse that was eventually built was the place that Anne liked to hang out the very most when she was younger and older, I suppose. It had all these magazines plastered to the wall, which were in those days very risque. You can picture the pictures. Yeah, they were women. So let me talk a little bit about Frank Willis. Frank Willis was Anne Bassett's second husband, and he was just a solid, strong guy who supported Anne in all of her wild whims and ideas, and was with her to the end of her life, and was would tell stories about her. You see, Anne was an exaggerator. She was also a writer and wrote many things which Josie always poo-pooed. And I have to say that one of the biggest conflicts is the conflict between the 2 women. You see, Josie, Anne, after she went to trial and was acquitted, was given the name by the people of Craig, Colorado, Queen Anne of the Cattle Rustlers. But in 1934-ish, Anne had some people, or Josie had some people come out to her homestead, and they were from Life magazine, and they asked her if she had actually stolen or rustled cattle, if she would be willing to show them how she did it. And so if you go to the archives, you'll find that article there. Oh my goodness, every script about a Western should have a bear story in it. And there'll be a bear story because Anne was always up to something. When she was a baby, her mother had no milk, and so she was fed by an Indian woman named Siabaka. And Siabaka halfway raised her, and she played with Siabaka's son because she was a wet nurse for her, and she nursed both babies. And she sometimes attributed her wildness to the Native American blood that was in her. Eventually, Siabaka made a Native American costume for her. And one day when her father was entertaining some very important people from back east, she just happened to run through the house, whooping like an Indian in her native costume that her mother had made. Well, I don't want to give away the whole story. I mean, there's a lot more to it. But I do want to tell you, those are the main characters that you'll find in the story about the Bassett family who settled on the Green River, a 30-mile long stretch of land just rich with green grass growing plentiful and high. And that was what the cattle rustlers, or the cattle barons, wanted. The cattle barons wanted the water and the grass, and they had to defend it. Now, I didn't say anything about the fact that both girls were friends with Butch Cassidy, that he wandered in and out in his days as he traipsed through the country on his various escapades. And the degree to which the relationships went will be left pretty much in the background, because they didn't have anything to do with what Josie and Ann really cared about, what they really wanted. So let me go back to my hat. My hat is a Stetson. Got it from my dad. My dad always wanted to be a cowboy, but he grew up in southern Alberta, Canada. And when he was finished being a doctor and retiring, he bought all the boots that he could, snakeskin boots from all over the world, hats. And one day, when he was visiting in Wyoming, he picked this one up for me. And I cherish it because he passed away from ALS back in 1995. I don't wear it much, so I'm kind of happy to be able to have the opportunity to wear it today. But let's go to the beginning of how I became a scriptwriter. I was 15 years old, and we had just moved to Salt Lake City, Utah. I was reading the newspaper, and I picked it up. And as I was reading along, I saw a picture of this old woman. She was really old. I mean, I don't know exactly how old she was, but her name was Josie Bassett. And as I saw that picture, I was just so intrigued with it that I just, and the story, I just had to tell my dad, because she had lived for 40 years on her own little homestead with no running water, no electricity, no heat in her home. She slept outside, it said in the article, on her porch in the winter throughout the year. And you could see in the picture all of the old-time bottles and canning, things she'd canned and the things she had done. And I turned to my dad and I said, Dad, I said, look at this picture of this woman. You can't believe it. She's like a modern day pioneer. She's alive right now. And she's lived in Utah, right where we live. And my dad, he was busy with his section of the paper, and so I harassed him a little bit, and I said, hey, you gotta look at this. And he said, honey, you know how I am when I get home from work. I just want to collapse. You guys just, you're always after me the second Dad, you don't understand. You don't even listen to me. Well, probably should. Yeah, you're a shrink. You listen to people all day long, and you pay no attention to us when we get home and we want to tell you what happened in our day. So Dad came over and, yeah, he read the article with me, and he said, "That's really cool, hon. Yeah, you're right. I should pay more attention to you guys." Well, time went by. I was in my 30s, my late 30s, and I was married for the second time. And my husband just happened to be from Vernal, Utah, which is not very far, 40 to 50 miles from Browns Park, Utah. And so one day we were talking, and I was telling him about this lady that I had seen in the paper when I was young. And he said, "Oh," he said, "my mom, my mom knows about them, and she's read a book about them. And, I'll tell her about it." So he did. And the name of the book was The Bassett Woman. So, probably need to, well, I changed the title with The Trials because, there were 2 trials. Anyway, when we went out to visit one time, he gave me the book, and on the way home, about 180 miles, I read the book. Just like that. I was done with it by the time we made it back to the house. And I told him how much I loved it and how much I just felt this family, how they were part of, I could just see them in my mind, and how exciting it was to me. I always wanted, like, if my dad would just drive by a log cabin or an old deserted house when we were on a trip, I'd just pester him no end. "Please, Dad, please stop. I need to be in there. I just need to be inside of that house." And I needed to feel what it felt like to be inside. I got a touch of that from Grace McClure's book. And so he said, "Oh," he said, "that's a great book. I'm sure probably very good. But the book you really need to read is When the West Was Young." There's a lot of stuff in there about the Bassett Woman. So eventually, though it was out of print, I got a copy of it. Awesome book about the West and those times in that area of the country. But one day he said, "My mom is friends with one of Josie Bassett's granddaughters. Her name's Amy Lube." And so he said, "Mom might be able to fix you up so you could go and talk to Amy and, get some of the first-hand stuff and see what she has to say, see if that's something you want to listen to or something you might want to do something with." Well, I just finished my master's degree, and I was so ripe for a project. And writing hadn't always been my thing, but I had been to Washington, D.C., and for my present for getting my master's, and I had decided to sign up for a screenwriting class. So I said, "Would you ask your mom if she will set that up?" And she did. And I went to Amy's house, and I brought a tape recorder. And I said, "Amy, I'd like to, just interview you about the realities of having such a famous and different grandmother." and I'd love to hear the story firsthand. But I might like to do some writing. I probably won't write a book like Grace did. She knew Grace, and Grace had interviewed her, and so she said, yeah, sure, that'd be okay. You can record it if you'd like to. And I thought recording it would be more comfortable and better than taking notes, and so I recorded Amy talking to me about her grandma, Josie, for 45 minutes, hour, and I have that tape someplace as well. Then one day my dad said to me, he said, you know, I've been talking about the renewed interest in the Bassetts, and so he said, why don't we go on this horseback riding trip that I saw advertised in Vernal. It's up by Diamond Mountain, and it's down a little narrow canyon, and the two of us could go up. You can rent the horses. You don't even have to ride them. Yes, I've ridden horses in my life. We've always had horses. And so I said, yeah, sure, that'd be great. So the two of us rode down a canyon that very few people in this day and age traverse unless they're on horseback. We were riding to the Jarvie Ranch, and the Jarvies, of course, are just minor characters in the play, neighbors. Important ones, though. So just before as we got to the base of the mountain, we had to ride across the river, and for those of you that are familiar with Westerns, you'll understand that riding horses across rivers isn't always the easiest thing to do. It doesn't always go well. It didn't particularly go well for one horse that day, but fortunately we had some people that were able to go and save it from drowning. But KUTV came out from down in Salt Lake. They filmed us riding into the site, and did a little bit of filming, sent me a VHS of our short little interview or time that we spent with them, just having lunch or whatever. Can you see what's happening? Can you start to get a feeling about why this script began to formulate in my mind? So yeah, eventually when I got time, and I was the mother of 5 plus a full-time educator, when I got time, I started writing the script on Caltex. It was fun. I started taking classes, screenwriting classes, wherever I could find one that was in the local area. I started paying attention. Robert Redford, in his book, The Outlaw Trail, has pictures of the Bassetts, and I had his book, and of course I had read it. I read everything I could get my hands on that had anything to do with the Bassett women. And I think I have a pretty good feel for those who stretched their stories, or those who tried to make them look like something worse than they really were. Because one thing I learned about writing a script is it's good to have redeeming values in your characters. And from what I know and what I've studied, my gut tells me that those who tried to exaggerate their intentions have gone too far. So, oh my. What do I say? There came a time in my life when I was not married. My children were grown. I was retired from teaching, and I needed something to do. So I started that script. The script was a challenge, but like I say, I read everything I could get my hands on. And I didn't know how good the dialogue was or wasn't. I still don't, to be honest. I did 9 revisions. And on the 9th revision, I let my uncle read it. And he asked me if I was writing a documentary, and that kind of hurt my feelings, because really, I hoped there was a little more excitement in it than a documentary might have. And it kind of discouraged me for a while. Then I got kind of discouraged with Hollywood, with thinking about, where do you go from here? I had the finished script. It was read. It felt good. I liked it. I felt like it told the story. But I just let it sit. And decided that, like a lot of people do, that it would probably just rest and be the fulfillment of a passion that I had. There was only one problem with that. And though my life continued to take different turns and courses, the script, oh yes, the script. Excuse me. The script was there, and I just had to pick it up again, because I can't let go. I've read all the books I can find. Now, piecing the story together is huge, because there's just so much content. There are so many stories. And if I think about script writing, I have to say this, that the screenwriter has to, even though they're writing about real people that really lived, and they've read so many different versions of the story, they didn't actually hear the words the people said. So exaggeration is a great device, and we know that it works in the movies. So the challenge of trying to stay with the story, but the challenge of trying to pick which version you like best almost leaves you with that reality that the best story the best version, and perhaps the best exaggeration will be the one most exciting for the viewer on the screen. So here I am. At this age, I'm not going to say my age. I sometimes feel proud of it, but I can't let it go, and I keep trying, and I keep writing the story of the Bassett family. And maybe it's time. I feel like it is. Because even though technology is not a piece of cake for somebody my age, I don't write on Celtics anymore. I write on Final Draft, and I look at trying to write something that will have the quality to be looked at. So as I tell my story today, I'm just telling you, look at it. I'm asking you. I always wanted to ask Robert Redford. Doggone it, he's a tad older than I am, so I don't know if he's thinking about reading scripts these days, or listening to ideas, or if he's willing to promote people. That's not to say that I'm willing to give up the idea, if I could get him interested. But I think I'll just start looking for someone who is interested. Now here's another option, and it's the one that I'm working on the most right now. It isn't the story I just told. However, it's attached to it. Yellowstone had a sequel, and Yellowstone had a prequel. And so I've been searching for the families of the Bassets and the earliest stories of the Bassets. And now I have some new characters. So I don't know if a limited episode with 6 to 8 episodes, a limited series, I mean, with 6 to 8 episodes, with the Bassett women in the middle. There's so many great stories that I couldn't fit, that you can never fit in a screenplay. So I could stretch them out a bit, and that's where I am right now. I have a dilemma. Because what I've done is I've looked at the mother and father, Elizabeth and Herb, and where they came from. And I've looked at Elizabeth's birth, and the story in itself is pretty darn intriguing. It's a story about two families, really, the Chamberlain family and the Miller family. The Millers started out in Virginia. Now, I know that if you're watching this, you probably are not with me anymore, because I'm just telling this story to feel it out. So, the Millers and the Chamberlains happen to be neighbors. Is it 16 minutes? Okay. And And so um, they were slaveholders. And they arrived. Well, let's talk about the setting for them. Elizabeth was born in Hot Springs, or Rockport, Arkansas. There were no doctors. Well, few maybe, but doctors just, it wasn't, the same. So when Elizabeth was about 2 years old, her sister, Hannah, was born. No, Martha. Hannah Martha. When Hannah was born, her mother passed away in childbirth. Now the Millers, one of the Chamberlain's daughters, married one of the Millers' sons. And so if you start looking at those two families, you find that you want to know more about how they ended up being neighbors and where they came from. So the Millers came from Rockingham, Virginia. The Chamberlains came from Bedford, Tennessee. Now the Chamberlains were headed for Texas when they pioneered out of Tennessee. And they did so because Arkansas was offering an incredible amount of land for free. The United States. They had taken the land, of course, from the Kiowa Indians, but they were now giving it out to citizens. And besides that, the Nat Turner Rebellion had gotten kind of wild and scary. And so I think both families were interested in getting away from the intensity of the slavery question, because both of them, of course, had slaves. So why not take your slaves to a less volatile part of the country and get more land than you already have, settle there, use your slaves to help you build up a new plantation, and financially improve your life. Well, I started writing it a little bit, and the first part goes that, Prudence did not want to leave Virginia. So Prudence ends up deciding that she was going to be with her husband. She whined and cried about leaving her parents, who thought she would never see again. It wasn't easy. The trail they were going to travel, it had been traveled before and had been pioneered by the Miller family initially. But Rockport was a small community, and she was fearful. But her husband calmed her, and he was the kind of guy that he wanted her to be with him. and he wanted her to be with him not only in body, but in attitude. And he was able to convince her that this was the right thing for their family. So they went there. It wasn't an easy travel by any means. There were no, there were some stagecoaches. Between the two families, they traveled with carriages, with wagons. They, behind them, followed their slaves. And how they settled is yet to be written, how they came together. All I know is that because they came together, that Herb Bassett, who had fought in the Civil War and had been and ended up in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and eventually in Rockport, he entered the story, and he met that orphaned, because her father had died in the war. Because even though they were afraid of the war came to them. In fact, William Pulaski Chamberlain, who was older than George Crawford Chamberlain, or Miller, was killed in his own barn by the Union soldiers, along with one of his slaves, I believe, or his helpers. Well, my time is running out, and I'm getting a little bit weary of an hour of storytelling. But I will tell you that the passion for the story doesn't go away, and every day I spend my time searching for more story and connecting more family and finding more reasons for why these people were who they were. After William Chamberlain dies about 8 years later, maybe 10, Herb Bassett is in Hot Springs. He's come there, and he is a county clerk, and Judge Miller, who's become a judge by then, is raising his great-granddaughter. His other great-granddaughter was being raised by a black slave in a different state. And unfortunately, that slave wouldn't allow her to learn to read or write. But Martha did well. She got married and had lots of children, over 10. And that's kind of the gist of the story that I know. So I'm looking for the ways that the methods of travel. When William Pulaski came later than Henry Miller, and Henry came with 2 of his sons to settle Rockport, and that country was completely untouched. They just chopped down the trees. They were like earliest pioneers ever. When William came, he his family were traveling along the river, and they were trying to cross the river, but unfortunately a huge storm had come and washed the ferry away to get them to Rockport, which was close to Hot Springs and what eventually became Hot Springs. And Hot Springs has a story all of its own, but we won't go there. Anyway, he, so hard with the tangents. The ferry master said, you know, I don't know how you're going to get across. But it just so happened that Chamberlain was a wheelwright and an engineer and worked with steel and offered to help to build a new ferry. It took a few months, but when they completed the ferry, he'd become friends with all the people, and they liked him. He was so endeared himself to them that they begged him to stay. And so that's how the Chamberlains ended up being in Rockport. It turns out that George Miller's daughter marries the founder of Rockport's daughter, Mary Emerson. And so it all comes together, and it's really fun to match these people up and to hear their stories. The childbirth story is a fearful one because George Miller's first wife, Mary, was only married 2 years when his daughter, Hannah, was born, and his wife died in childbirth. And Hannah had only been married 2 years, had one child, Mary Elizabeth, or Eliza Bassett, and died in childbirth with her second child, Hannah Reynolds Rutherford. So that's the story that I have to tell. And I hope that somebody finds it interesting, and I hope that I get to play with it, and that I get to find someone who wants to do that with me, and to create something that is exciting at every turn, because even in my own life, that's the way it's been. Surprises at every turn. Even for me, I married my first husband when I was 21. I had 5 children with him. We were divorced after 12 years. And 63 years later, we married again. And we had the opportunity to have a new family structure, but our old family is all with us as well. And there have been many twists and turns and sorrows and tragedies along that way. So that's the story I have to tell today. For anybody that was interested enough to listen to the entire thing. I don't wear my hat when I'm writing, but I sit in front of a computer and I research ancestry all day and the Internet Archives, and I search for the stories of the people that I've come to hear about, to read about, and to somehow feel like I know.